Welcome back to 50 Days to Rebuild, the series where I do 50 minutes of exercise and read 50 pages of a physio book in a day. This is day 7. Starting off with my exercise, so I tried to basically just address some of my shoulder issues again today. Wasn't actually too bad this morning, thankfully, after my sleep, so I basically just focused on not aggravating it. I've just been hypothesizing what had caused it, and I imagine it's something to do with really this serratus roll as I described in the last video. So just tried to think about how best to cue some of these movements, especially in something like the bird dog, because that was actually really aggravating it. I spent quite a lot of time trying to essentially disentangle some of these motions from others. So trying to figure out how I can actually externally rotate while upwardly rotating, because I was noticing I was basically internally rotating normally when I was doing these exercises and this cueing. So spent a lot of time doing that and eventually came into trying to do a bench press, which is something I haven't done for a very long time, but felt quite good. I really tried to emphasize posterior tilt and then keeping that emphasis on as I retracted changed the game for me. I feel like normally I really cave into an anterior tilt, and this felt like, don't get me wrong, a big struggle to maintain this, but this felt like the way around it. When people say like keep your chest high, I feel like that, it's close to what I was trying to do, but almost like your lower chest high or keep your serratus out, and that seemed much better. For the bird dog, I didn't really focus on upward rotation. I really tried to keep that more of that scooping forward and out. But I think also allowing it to sort of wrap around the body while externally rotating. I just wasn't worried about the upward rotation. And when I took that out of the equation and assumed that scooping forward and out did also facilitate upward rotation, which I think it had to for my shoulder to get up that high, that seemed to work a lot better. So that might be something worth translating to the serratus exercise as well. In terms of what I was reading, so I was just finishing off anatomy trains and covering the portion on structural integration. This is essentially the manual therapy that the author used and I believe developed following along from these fascial meridians. The overarching approach here is start superficial, work on the superficial front line, the superficial back line, and then the lateral lines. From there, move on to the deep front line and I believe deep back line. Interestingly, there wasn't too much covered about the arm or functional lines, but they were saying that essentially after doing that superficial and deep work, even though those arm lines are often more superficial than the other tissues, only then do they address that. And the argument here was that we're basically realigning the pelvis and the rib cage to then rebalance the shoulders upon. Now that the base is better supported, we can actually do this work on the superficial tissues of the arms so that it will stick, basically, that we won't lose these extra bits of range. After that, they talked about integration. This was certainly less clearly illustrated, but seemed to be when they're talking about A, working on these functional and arm lines, and also B, trying to actually induce more muscle tone in certain lines so we get a balance between the lines. When trying to assess somebody, in this case myself, they were saying that when you're palpating to just go very slow and the first layer of resistance you encounter to work there and to work locally, and then from there, if that's not working, that's when we start to spread out along the lines. In general, in terms of palpation and trying to make changes, they were saying that once we encounter the first layer of resistance, just to stay there and work there. We're not trying to get through to the deep layers now at least, and even when we are, we're not trying to force change. We're just trying to slowly allow it to occur. So that finished the anatomy trains book, but I still had about 30 pages left to read, which brings us to Your Spine, Your Yoga. This has been sitting on my wardrobe for maybe years at this point. It's a recommendation from Dr. Stuart McGill, the guy that has me doing the McGill method, so that big 3. Basically, this book is around how to customize the yoga practice to your spine. From the get-go, we start off with a preface from McGill, and super insightful because McGill is so pro-stability. I read his low back disorders. He really argued against ever really moving the spine, especially under load. And preface of this book is saying, yes, stability is important, but also true resiliency is having both extremes, stability and the ability to move, but that we need to prioritize stability over mobility. And that is such an insight into McGill that I love, because I think there's some balance to be struck between the ATG, move the spine, let's do Jefferson curls, and then the McGill method, just stabilize everything. And I think there's a middle ground there, and I think this is moving me towards identifying what that is, so that's really exciting. Coming back to the whole purpose of this book is that we're not trying to get the yoga poses or the asanas to be aesthetically pleasing. We're not trying to meet an ideal. The central argument here is that this average of perfect alignment isn't real. Most people don't fit that. The vast majority of people don't fit it. That what we need to chase is a nice feeling through it. And if we're being really functional about it, we need to be like, okay, what area do I want to target? And then be very mindful during those poses of, does it feel like I'm targeting this properly? And if not, adjusting. And I think that's a much better approach to just trying to cram your way into the correct pose. Following along from this idea of not trying to force into positions that you maybe anatomically can't, there was this question that he said that you should pose to yourself, which is, what's stopping me? So when you're doing a pose, some sort of stretch, what's stopping me from progressing this further? And essentially the argument was, if it's something tensile, and it's essentially some sort of soft tissue, you can probably keep going over time, just don't rush it. But if it's something compression-y, which could be flesh on flesh or flesh on bone or bone on bone, then that's sort of your hard limit. And don't keep pushing, you're going to hurt yourself. Again, in this idea of trying to find the balance between McGill and ATG, this author touched on atrophy, which I think is such a good point. So basically showing that if we don't move something at all through its range of motion, we're going to atrophy the joint. And this is true for the spine, right? But also, if we absolutely abuse it with movement, has no stability, we're going to hurt it. But the answer isn't no movement or maximal movement, it's somewhere in the middle. And again, that's just very insightful and very excited for where that takes me. I will say though, he did specify that when injury is present, that window sort of narrows. What's a good level of load to expose your spine to is going to reduce. There was a cool technique mentioned around how to increase awareness through the spine, which is definitely, when I watched some of the footage of me like laterally flexing accidentally, something that would be really nice, which was essentially to palpate along the spinous processes, really try and feel them and be aware of them as we're moving through some sort of flexion and extension movement. He said that if you practice this over time, you become very aware of where your spine is in motion. So that's something I think I might try. I was also quite excited to hear him say that the spine is like a spring. A healthy spine was actually how he specified it though. The reason I found this quite exciting was I know of like David Weck, for example, and him talking about how the spine is a bit of like an engine of movement. And, you know, you can quite clearly see him doing like these twisting, springy movements. And that's so enticing to me, but also seeing like, hey, that's the function of a healthy spine, and acknowledging that I'm not there yet. I shouldn't be trying to do those movements yet. Flowing into this idea of everybody is different, there's certain movements that some people can do that others can't. They discussed spinal hinges. So this is really common in like a hyperextension of the spine. For example, you might get like a sacral low spine hinge where one joint comes really far forward. Or sorry, not far forward, but a really far extension. Or perhaps even the opposite, so a really far flexion. I definitely feel like I get this. Interestingly, he argued that it's not necessarily a bad thing. Certain people can do it. We probably shouldn't load it very heavily. We should try and take load off of it, to be exact, while we're doing it. But that some people can do it and some people can't, and that the big modifier here is pain. If I have pain during or after, I probably push too far. And he did specify if you have spondylolisthesis, like myself, you probably shouldn't be pushing some of those ranges. So yeah, that was just a nice little clarification. And yeah, that was it for day 7. That is 1 week down. Feeling like we're getting more into the swing of things. So I'm excited to see where this takes me. And yeah, Thanks for watching along, and I'll see you tomorrow.